video diary. I went round with my camera. I had some professional help, as you can imagine. But the advantage of using this sort of camera is that you can go to places that proper film units couldn't go into. But at the same time, you have to accept that not all the pictures that were taken were of the very highest broadcast quality. And anyone with an amateur video knows exactly what I mean. 18 months after the election of the Labour government in May 1997, it is possible now to get some sort of assessment, apart from the resignation of a number of ministers, and a lot of people may be beginning to wonder whether the honeymoon isn't coming to an end and what the future holds for the Labour Party. Like Hitchcock, you've got to appear in your own movie. It's probably best to begin my report from my Chesterfield constituency, which I've represented for 15 years. And on the great events like May Day, people come out in their thousands, all to celebrate their common interest in building a better society. Comrades, this is a celebration of a victory a year ago, when we established what democracy is all about, that if the people... There have been some really remarkable achievements by the new government. More money for health and education, legislation on the minimum wage, which will help an awful lot of poorly paid workers. They've introduced the windfall tax to pay for the welfare to work. One of the most important for me, certainly, because I've always believed in it, was the decision to bring all the parties, including Sinn Féin, into discussions in Northern Ireland, the ceasefire, the end of a lot of the violence. But having said all that, you and I know that there are formidable problems still to be faced by the Labour government. For me and most members of Parliament, our work really lies in the constituency, and it's there that the effect of government policy is felt. Right, okay. Where was I?
He did come to see about his brother-in-law having a visa to continue to do an education course, if you remember.
Right.
Is it that one?
And if anyone is true.
Day in, day out, hour in, hour out, dealing with complaints, because that's all they must get complaints. Thanks a lot.
Anyway, I'm here every week, so if you want to come and see me.
Yeah.
And was refused permission because there was some doubt about whether he would be able to finance himself while he was here. Do you want to go on to the phone?
Yes, that's all right.
This is the best bit, you know, really, of being an MP. I find that people coming with a whole range of problems are most satisfying of all, because quite properly their main concern is their housing or pensions or employment or something. And you try to sort out their problems and then try and work out for yourself what would need to be done and what policies would have to be changed to see these problems didn't occur again. And I think if I were honestly asked to say where I got most of my political ideas from, more political motivation would be better, it would be here in the surgery in Chesterfield. New Labour and all that. Has New Labour been what people hoped for?
No, I don't think so. I don't get me wrong. I mean, there's good points. You know, there's good points. But I don't think Labour has done what people thought they were going to do. I mean, after all those years of the Tory government, they thought when Labour went in with just a huge majority that they did, that they were expecting miracles, and I'm afraid it's not happening.
I put you on a special seat.
We've got council problems to do with housing. We've got education problems to do with grants, when there's been any changes in grants or that type of thing. We've obviously got NHS problems, you know, and immigration problems. I think we've been busy.
I was first elected to Parliament 48 years ago, and increasingly the constituency seems an awful long way from the centre of power in Downing Street. I've come to look for Humphrey. Tony Benn. There's a meeting at 2 o'clock, I think, today, isn't there? But at least backbench MPs do get invited occasionally to go to number 10 in groups to see the Prime Minister. I'm immortalising you.
Oh, right.
Digital ones.
I want to ask you for your autograph.
Oh, yes. He was always a nuisance, wasn't he?
At these meetings, members of Parliament have an opportunity of asking questions to the Prime Minister and he answers, but the whole thing is a bit of a formality, as indeed are cabinet meetings themselves.
Goodness me. That's it. Tony, let me get you into Zoom.
The Cabinet now is very much a rubber stamping body. It meets, as you know, on a Thursday, usually only for about half an hour or slightly longer these days, and we look at the business of government in the round, but we don't normally look at individual papers.
But there are also some social gatherings, not only for members of Parliament, but for party workers in the constituency. And this one was given by Gordon Brown, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, at number 11 Downing Street.
It's a great pleasure to introduce Gordon Brown, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Labour Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Can I say first of all, friends, that the first thing that I want to do is to thank all of you for these tremendous election results on May. This was a victory that was won not by politicians in London, but by people in every constituency. And I think the important thing of this evening is not just to thank you, but to recognise that we will succeed next time by working together, and we will succeed in meeting our goals for employment if we work together. So thank you very much for coming. Drink as much as you like until the budget.
It was a very jolly occasion, but of course the question that's in my mind is what kind of party has the Labour Party become? So I thought I'd put this question to Roy Hattersley, who was, of course, at one time deputy leader of the Labour Party. And if I start with New Labour, what does it mean?
Well, I fear it means something rather precise. It doesn't sound precise, but what the Prime Minister, what Tony Blair wants it to mean, is a new party. The emphasis is essentially on the new. It's a new party, and it's not a socialist party. I mean, when I went to see Tony Benn to talk about when I went to see Tony Blair, he's a mistake to make. When I went to see Tony Blair to talk about his record, I said, I'm not a student, I'm not a single mother, I'm not a fox, therefore this government's done rather well by me. And he had to agree that that was the case. It's not workers as such who are being neglected. Some workers are doing very well. It's the people on the bottom 10% of incomes, or the bottom 20% of incomes. They're doing terribly badly. They're worse off than they were when Labour was elected.
Roy's absolutely right. It is a completely new party, and Labour MPs are controlled in much the same way that Roy tries to control Buster. The first thing new members, I think, noticed was they were expected to be on message, and the pages given to all of us are an example of how that control system works. This is my pager, and I've kept on it all the messages for this purpose that I've had in the last 24 hours, 12 of them. First one was there is a possibility of 2 divisions at 10 o'clock. A further division is expected 1.5 hours later. Now that was handy because you didn't know, if you were here in the House, whether there would be likely to be a division, 1 division, 2 divisions and so on. So that gave you very important information. Then later on it said division imminent. So it is a very good system. But of course, in the end, you feel, in a sense, you're receiving orders, and that does slightly diminish the sense of being a representative, because I don't get pager messages from my constituents. Everybody knows about number 10 Downing Street and number 11 Downing Street, but the chief whip works from number 12 Downing Street.
Number 10, number 11, number 12. I suppose I know where I'm going to park.
And I thought it'd be interesting to go and talk to him about the sense of party discipline and how it works to keep us on message.
And inside number 12 Downing Street, those Labour members of Parliament who've been appointed as whips, members of the government, meet every day to plan the parliamentary business, and they're the ones who issue instructions to Labour MPs to indicate how they're expected to vote on government business.
Right. Comrades, can we come to order? Thanks. As you see, we're having some establishing shots taken of us, and we're taking our belief in open government to its logical conclusion. Too far. And,
I don't think in the whole of my life I've ever seen on television a picture of the whips at work. And I'm doing
Every MP has a whip, and mine is Graham Allen.
Before we go any further, Tony, does Graham treat you nicely? Treat you kindly and fairly?
I've just had a pager message. Leave at once.
Right, yes, you're very well. Can we now seriously...
The pager system is shrouded in myth. Everyone assumes that sort of orders come from the Labour Party headquarters telling MPs which question to ask. You've actually got one of our pagers, so you know what messages we send. Ken Livingstone came to see me because he's got one as well, and he wondered whether he got separate messages from everybody else, whether we sort of sent him sort of nice ones and other people got more detailed ones. But it's hardly the instrument of tyranny that it's much represented as. Every member of Parliament is treated the same. I mean, you'll notice that the Whip's office do not use the allocation of offices or the allocation of permission to be away as a disciplinary weapon in the Parliamentary Labour Party. And that, I'm told, is an enormous cultural change.
Well, it is, because in the old days you wouldn't be on a select committee or go on a delegation if you caused trouble.
Yeah.
And the Tories, I believe, their first disciplinary weapon was withdrawing the invitation to the Royal Garden Party from Tory MPs.
Yeah, our first disciplinary weapon is to make you go, but we use it sparingly. Yeah.
No, I've been doing this since September, just filming everything and putting it on a VHS.
When Trevor McDonald came to do an interview with me about Paul Robeson, the great American socialist and artist whom I knew, he had the opportunity of seeing for himself exactly what it means to be on message.
Okay. Nice thing about radio is you don't have to...
I know, do all this stuff, I know. And we're talking about Paul Robeson.
Oh, that's my daily facts from the Labour Party telling me what to say.
Oh, tell me what to say today, yes. What
you know about that. I get personalised facts every morning. It says, Mr. Ben
what should you say
welcomes the government's announcement that old age pensioners are to do homework every morning, and I'm expected to take it out of the facts and pop it in again to the Derbyshire Times. I think the thing's unbelievable. We're not... I'm not kidding. We're not representatives, we're Avon ladies. This is what we get. I mean, it's a complete end of representative government.
That's amazing. I didn't realise they sent you it every day. I realised there was a...
Well, my pager said when the Chancellor sits down, a personalised press release will be waiting for you. So before I've heard the budget, I go down, pick it up. Tony Benn welcomes the budget. I mean, when Man Mandelson said last week the era of representative democracy is coming to an end, I mean, he meant it.
The Labour Party has always tried to improve its communications, but when New Labour was invented in 1994, the party sent people over to study the American techniques and brought them back to Britain. The use of spin doctors, of focus groups, of news management, of sound bites, and, of course, Excalibur, the computer on which a record is kept of what everybody has said. I've got 5,000 entries, I was told, on Excalibur myself. So I went along to the Millbank Tower, where the party headquarters are now situated. And for me, it's an interesting visit because I was actually born there on that very site. And in the Millbank Tower, they have Excalibur. How do you respond to those who say that the Millbank Tower is running a control freak organisation? You know, you've heard the phrase.
Well, in one way, I take that as a compliment in one way, because I think that Millbank Tower is seen as being relevant and important in the Labour Party's political life. And there have been times in the history of the party, as you know, Tony, when kind of, you know, the party machine, transport had overthrown, it wasn't important, nobody wanted to know about it. It was seen as inefficient and ineffective. And now everybody thinks Millbank Tower is a professional, effective place, and I like that.
I had hoped that I'd be able to film Excalibur and the work done in the office, but I was told that that was absolutely prohibited. But hearing that I was in the building, some of the people who worked there looked in for a chat.
I was born here. I was born in a house here, and Sidney Webb lived next door. And Clause 4 was drafted where we are and removed where we are. No, I'm not kidding you. No, I was literally on the spot. I was born, I looked out in my childhood across the river exactly from the same side that I am now, and Sidney and Gladys Webb lived next door. And I was versed with technology on the 11th floor. And after that, the young policy officers came into the room, and I discovered for the first time that these were the people who actually drafted and sent me the faxes that I get every day at home. Tony Benn welcomes the compulsory homework for pensioners. And it comes out of it with quotes from me, which you have written. Is that right? And then I'm supposed to pop it back into the fax machine for the Derbyshire Times. No, but I mean, I've often wondered whether it came from government departments or from you. Oh, no. I'm treasuring them, actually, because they... Tony Benn welcomes the budget. I don't, did you write? No, well, I've got quotes from me, saying 232 lone parents in Chesterfield will benefit by 50p a week, or from the database of my constituents, in quotes. Well, now that is really something.
As I wasn't allowed to film in the office, I thought I'd go up to the top of the Millbank Tower, where I used to work myself 30 years ago, to get some views from the tower over London. And there I met a woman who'd actually looked after me at that time.
Of course, the Labour Party's at the bottom now.
Well, that's right. I think they're on the. I think they're actually where the main dining room.
Probably. I've just been down there talking to Tom Sawyer, the General Secretary.
All right.
See, that is the MI5 building down there.
That's right.
That's where my officers as Secretary of State for Energy were. Though I wasn't allowed to film in the building, I was able to film out of the building. And I learned more about what happened inside from a young American student who'd worked there as an intern a year ago.
Compared with the American system, the one thing that I was amazed at was that MPs really did listen to the party and what the party wanted them to say to the media. I mean, that just wouldn't happen in the American system. Congressmen are much more concerned with how their own constituency or district feels about what they're saying to the media, and not really what the party wants them to say at all.
Where does the message come from?
That's a difficult question. I don't know. I was just an intern. It's sort of hard for me to answer. I mean, certainly a lot of it comes from briefings given by Downing Street every morning to the assembled media, and the people at Millbank Tower get a copy, usually, of the briefings coming from Downing Street.
And the real significance of meetings like this is that at number 10 Downing Street, every day at 11 o'clock, the lobby journalists come and they receive the first news of government policy long before the House of Commons gets it. And that does represent a serious erosion of parliamentary democracy. We're in the room where the government press officers and indeed party press officers meet the lobby correspondents. They sit in the chairs here. The room is almost on the roof of the Palace of Westminster. It overlooks the river, and behind you can see Big Ben very clearly from halfway up. And every day at 4 o'clock, all the lobby correspondents, or most of them, file in here, and the press officer, sometimes accompanied by a minister, will sit here. Then they all go away and you hear the 6 o'clock news, and you'll hear them say it's understood the government is going to do this or that or the other. It's an old convention. It does mean really that the spin doctors and the spin patients, which is what you might call lobby correspondents, come together in this surgery to get their drugs for tomorrow. This is my website, TonyBenn.oldLabour.ok.
Come in, really come in.
Come in.
Right. Prime Minister, Chair of Cabinet.
When Alistair Campbell, the Prime Minister's press secretary, invited me into the briefing, I was able to film something that has never been seen on the screen before.
He welcomes the fact that the debate prior to the Scottish parliamentary election.
And as the press spokesman speaks, the journalists write it down, and that's what we read in the papers the following day.
The policies. He will say that here Labour has a huge advantage in that we have a record of achievement which will allow us to fight a positive campaign and put a positive case to the electorate. He will make clear, before you ask, his total support for Donald, who has delivered as he said he would, who is a man with real clout in government and a man for whom the words trust and decency were coined. The set speeches tomorrow are not about attacking our opponents, but talking about
In October, the Labour Party conference met in Blackpool, and for many, many years I've always stayed at the Florida Apartments, where the landlady, Mrs. Shaw, has always been extremely kind to me.
You go in, you come up the stairs, round the corner, and this is where I've been, number 2, for a long, long time.
And I wanted to find out, while I was there, what exactly was meant by the Prime Minister's statement that we should give up socialism and adopt the third way. I didn't find any delegates at the conference talking about the third way at all. But in the Labour Party bookshop, Anthony Giddens, the great philosopher of the third way, was autographing his books. And so I decided to go and see him and ask him what exactly was meant by the third way.
I prefer the term third way politics because the sense we're all in the same game. I think if I don't know, I regard myself as a social democrat. If you do, we're in the same kind of game. That is, we want to see a society which is prosperous because you must have the wealth to distribute. We also want to see a society which makes serious efforts towards diminishing inequality. Not just, I think, for moral reasons, but because a society which doesn't attempt to make a serious attack on inequality is threatened.
But this presentation of the third way, as if it was actually happening, didn't really correspond with the experience of the people I met in the market in Blackpool.
How many homeless are there in
Quite a lot. Quite a lot. I think they've got a big a problem here in Blackpool with the homeless people.
Sleeping rough.
Sleeping rough, but I don't think they like to admit they've got it.
No. What do you think could be done, the most useful thing that could be done straight away?
I think there's more could be done to help people to come off drugs.
What do people get if they work in bars and hotels and things an hour? What do you reckon?
£2.85 an hour. I'm only going by where I live at Warrington. How many firms did we used to have in Warrington?
We've snowed over.
We snowed under with them.
Tanneries,
Steelworks, the lot. We haven't got a one now.
Steelworks.
Same at Chesterfield.
Only thing we've got is just the Saltworks, Crossfields.
Supermarket.
And that's on its last legs.
Supermarket.
But how far are people's problems really going to be solved by the policies followed by the new Labour government? And the most authoritative answer to that came from Peter Mandelson.
And those in the media, echoing the dreams of the few in our party who want the victory of new Labour with the policies of old Labour, the centralising, the crude tax and spend redistributionist policies of the past, those people are going to remain disappointed under Tony Blair.
Although Peter Mandelson has left the government since he made that speech, and indeed was subsequently made Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, he was the architect of New Labour, the real architect of New Labour. And there were many people who thought he was the most influential member of the government. Some thought even more influential than the Prime Minister. So it would be a mistake to think that because he has resigned, that influence will not still be felt within the Cabinet.
To look at the future, I went down to the Millennium Dome with Alan Simpson, the Secretary of the Socialist Campaign Group, to ask him how he saw the next century developing.
Well, I suppose if you want something that symbolises what the 21st century is supposed to be about, then the Dome is probably it. It's a very impressive superstructure. It will be full of all the most modern technology, and in which you will be able to find, I suppose, virtual housing, virtual reality pensions, virtual healthcare, virtual education. There may be interactive technologies that allow you to find virtual employment. In some ways, we're trying to fiddle the books at the moment, just to try and make them fit with the Maastricht Treaty, and in order to try and fit in with a world of free trade that Thatcher left us as her legacy, and which is ruining us all.
And this has already had a catastrophic effect on employment, including a factory in Chesterfield, which has laid off 90 workers.
Ladies and gentlemen, this train now approaching Chesterfield Station. Next call will be Chesterfield.
The biggest problem in Chesterfield is unemployment, where all the coal mines have been closed down, and now other companies are threatened.
I'm a tea man if there is tea.
Yes, take lots of advice. Now,
At Demaglass, both the managing director and the trade union official were united in condemning the high interest rates.
in Germany, 2 years ago, we sold £7 million worth of product. Next year, we will sell about £500,000 worth of product.
It's enormous.
Well, the effects on that in Chesterfield is there's going to be more people unemployed in Chesterfield. There aren't that many large companies coming into Chesterfield, but all we want is a level playing field with our competitors. If it's the pound and the exchange rate, please do something about it. If it's in interest rates, please do something about it. You can influence that. We can't as a small company in the Chesterfield area.
When the pensioners from Chesterfield came to see me at the House of Commons about their pensions, they were very concerned to try and get the link with earnings re-established, a link introduced by the last Labour government. But of course, it hasn't been done, and this is all about Europe. Our commitment to join the single currency means that public expenditure is being strictly limited.
Well, I think the aim to have pensioners linked with average earnings is quite a modest one, really. I know the government says it's very expensive, but unfortunately the Labour Party gave a pledge not to increase income tax rates during this Parliament.
Well, I'm in my room at the Commons, making a cup of
of tea. And the pensioners from Chesterfield have turned up. And I'm going to have a chat with them. They're a very active bunch of people. They have their annual meeting in the Winding Wheel in Chesterfield every year. I speak to them, and I encourage them, and they encourage me, and that's what life's all about.
We're 18 months into this newly elected government, and amongst the pensioners there's a certain amount of disillusionment going on. I mean, obviously there's going to come a time of accountability, and it always has to be remembered that those who put a government into office have got the power at a general election to remove them.
9 million votes is a hell of a lot of votes to disregard. And I think, without sounding absurd about it, I think you have to take some form of action the government cannot disregard. I don't know if anybody's got any ideas about this. I have a few, but it sounds so radical, I'm nervous of mentioning them.
Last summer there was a service in the Spire Church in Chesterfield to celebrate half a century of the National Health Service. And when people say socialism is dead, it's worth remembering that the health service is the greatest living example of socialism in practice.
Dear friends, we are here to celebrate the birth of the NHS 50 years ago. I've got my health service spectacles, and I've had 4 children, or my wife has, and 9 grandchildren on the NHS. It isn't about the structures that matters. In 1948, healthcare was removed from the market and put into our hands. It was never free. We've never had a free health service. You pay for it when you're well, and it's there when you need it, when you're ill. Well, if ever there was an example of the Christian faith introduced into daily life, that's it, isn't it? The National Health Service is at risk from the private finance initiative, which brings private money right into the heart of it. And this has been done because the government has been told by Brussels that it must strictly limit public investment, even in essential public services.
But it's not just the National Health Service that's threatened by the private finance initiative. It's also applying to schools, as I learned when I visited Pimlico Comprehensive in London.
Yes. What do you think of the Labour government privatising the London Underground?
Well, I'm against it. You know, I mean, the use of private finance initiative, which I understand may be involved in the school, is just a halfway house to private ownership. Because once you bring in private money, the price that would be paid, first of all, it wouldn't be long before the company that did that said, we'd like to employ the teachers, and we'll hire you the teachers, and we'll hire you the cleaners, and we'll hire you the catering staff. So in no time at all, people who are teachers find themselves in the private sector with poorer wages and conditions, which is why, of course, people like to privatise.
The plan at Pimlico School is to hand over a big chunk of the playground for building luxury flats, which is what privatisation is all about. And that has aroused enormous opposition. What's the teachers' view?
I would say the majority of the teachers are bitterly opposed to the thought of losing up to 25% of the school site for private luxury privatising.
Yeah.
I think no matter what they feel about this building and what needs to be done to it, almost all of them are opposed to the idea of building privatising on this site.
And the parents and the teachers fought a tremendous campaign to prevent it going through, and the school governors have come out against it. So this is a victory for those who are against New Labour's privatisation policies.
This is because the Chancellor doesn't want more public expenditure to get us into the single currency. I mean, that's what the whole thing's about, really, isn't it? And more expensive to do it this way, but less on your public sector borrowing requirement.
Tony Blair's seeking a mandate from this country. What will you put first? Education, education,
education. He did not say anything about demolition. He didn't say anything about profit and balance sheets, bricks and mortar, luxury buildings. He didn't. He said education, education, which is about hearts and minds and souls.
One of the most puzzling things to many people is why the new Labour government has followed so rigidly the public expenditure limits set by the previous Conservative government under Kenneth Clarke as Chancellor of the Exchequer. Why? What's the reason, a new government? And of course the answer comes in a document from the Council of Ministers in October 1997, addressed under the Maastricht Treaty to the Labour Chancellor, Gordon Brown, setting out the recommendation, which in effect is a requirement, namely that the government commit itself to sound finances and tight expenditure control. And this is all set out very, very clearly, saying the United Kingdom government should strictly implement the budgetary policy to achieve a balance. Now that is, of course, the main strategic decision-making comes from Brussels, and the execution of it has been handed over to Eddie George, the Governor of the Bank of England. So the Chancellor's role in all this is very limited. He doesn't set the strategy and he doesn't execute it. And that explains so many of the problems about National Health Service pay, about local government financing, about the private finance initiative or privatisation. And if you don't understand that, it's very, very difficult to understand what's happened and how the whole thing has been geared to get Britain into the single currency long before the referendum comes, when we're supposed to have the opportunity to make a choice for ourselves. And the state of the economy and future of the economy is one of the central questions that we discuss every week at a meeting of the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs. And in the course of the year, we've been very much involved in trying to protect the welfare state and lone parents, trying to prevent another bombing of Iraq, and also in the campaigns for free education for students. And on one occasion, we invited Eddie George to come to an open meeting to talk about his work at the Bank of England.
It is a bit like Daniel coming into the Lions Den. You have a pretty terrifying reputation in this particular group.
And when Eddie George came to the House of Commons to meet the campaign group, we were able to put questions to him about the impact of the single currency.
For putting it right. And if we have a central bank, it will even be illegal for the British government to try and influence the central bank.
I will come back on that straight away, because it seems to me to be fundamentally important. I think I would not disagree with quite a lot of what you said when you're talking about the European Central Bank.
He made it clear that even he had some doubts about the ultimate decisions being handed over to the central bank in Frankfurt.
One issue that simply hasn't gone away throughout the whole period has been the government's failure to do anything after the free vote to ban fox hunting, which they absolutely promised.
I mean, you really let us down.
Well, don't worry.
People who would never have voted Labour before voted Labour purely to ban hunting, and they will never vote Labour again unless hunting is banned.
This has led to a great deal of disillusionment and disappointment, and the reason is that the government was afraid of the House of Lords.
Now, I wanted the Labour government in the first 24 hours to abolish hunting, to put more money into the health service and schools. I wanted to do all those things almost immediately. And you recognise in life it doesn't happen like that. So we did want to see action on hunting very quickly. And it's something that won't cost the government any money. But the big fear, I think, is the House of Lords. And one of the worst aspects of the House of Lords is not what it does, but the fear of the House of Lords stops things getting there in the first place. It curtails government. And the worst thing that could have happened was the hunting bill, Mike Foster's bill, an excellent bill, would have gone into the House of Lords, and not only would the Lordships have blocked that, but have stopped other government legislation as well.
We're going to win.
Well, we
We're
are.
definitely going to win.
Now, tell me this. Why do you think the government didn't support the bill?
They have become sycophants to the royals, big business, and the aristocrats who've always ruled this country. And we're here to tell them it's time to go home, go to the waxworks and Madame Tussauds. that is my opinion of the House of Lords. Send them on.
But in the course of the year, I've been involved in far bigger campaigns of world significance, notably the attempt to stop the United States and Britain from bombing Iraq.
She's coming, filming with me, so you can come if you want.
And on this occasion, some of us took a petition to the Prime Minister in Downing Street.
We note there's been no call for military action by the United Nations Security Council, so we are upholding the rule of international law by objecting to unilateral military action.
And the tragedy is that at the end of the year, the bombing did start, and people from all over the country gathered outside Downing Street to express their anger at what had happened. New Labour has instituted a very tight control of independent thought and applied this for the selection of candidates for the European Parliament, all of whom were carefully vetted by a little National Executive Committee in order to keep out the left. And this is also applied in the case of the Scottish Parliament, where Dennis Canavan, who's been in the House of Commons 25 years, was deemed unsuitable to stand as a candidate in the Scottish parliamentary elections.
What we've got now is a cabal of a handful, or less than a handful of people, sitting in party headquarters in Glasgow or wherever, deciding whether or not I am a suitable candidate. And that, to my mind, has got more in common with Stalinism than democratic socialism.
Ken Livingstone, who was a very successful chairman of the Greater London Council, is obviously going to be rejected as the Labour candidate, even though he's overwhelmingly the most popular candidate in London, and not only among Labour members in London. Now, the Mayor of London is a very important idea. You had a different view of the elected assembly and so on with choosing the mayor. But you have yourself been subject to a lot of, indeed a mass, an avalanche of leaked stories that you were not their favourite choice. Now, how do you see this developing?
Every opinion poll has shown me ahead of everyone except for Branson. And in the last opinion poll, I was finally ahead of Branson. And the more they lobby against me, and the more the spin doctors rubbish me, the more my poll rating goes up. And so I think they now, this has become an issue of personality and character for Blair. I think it's one of those defining issues, because everybody knows what's going on. I mean, everyone's aware of this now. People will say, if Blair does intervene to stop me in some way, they will say it will make them think differently of Blair. All this sort of openness and friendliness and call me Tony and take me jacket off won't wear with stepping in and using a bureaucratic means rather like old Stalin or something ghastly out of a regime we'd rather not mention.
And so this control mechanism has been used to see that we're all on message, and the vetting of candidates is going to be based very largely on the record kept, the detailed record kept, of what every Labour candidate and every Member of Parliament says, derived from sources that may be public or in some cases might not be. It's now becoming apparent that New Labour isn't just a new version of the Labour Party, but the beginning of a totally new party in which Liberals and Conservatives are in effect brought into the heart of government as part of what's been called a patriotic alliance. And a week or two ago, one of the most remarkable examples of all-party cooperation, the deal on the House of Lords, under which instead of abolishing all hereditary peers, which was what the government was elected to do, Lord Cranborne reached an agreement under which 91 hereditary peers would remain elected by their fellow peers, and the Prime Minister, of course, will be free to use his patronage to appoint dozens more life peers. And so, in a way, that was a very clever deal. The only people who've lost by it are the public, who are now still denied the opportunity to elect both houses of Parliament, which is done in every other civilised country in the world. It was a great relief after seeing New Labour
close quarters, to be able to go off to the Durham Miners' Gala, where I'd been for many, many years, one of the great events of the Labour calendar.
Well, there's the light at the end of the tunnel they always tell you about. When you ask why you can't have full employment, they say, well, there's light at the end of the tunnel.
The most inspiring thing about coming to the Miners' Gala is the realization that we are the inheritors of the most fantastic tradition of solidarity and fraternity and internationalism and democracy going back over centuries. And frankly, when you come to an event like this, it's no surprise to find that these people don't relate in any way to the idea of New Labour. How would the party react if there was an attempt to create a fusion between Labour and Liberal Democrats?
Oh, I think there would be a huge outcry. I really do. I don't think, I do realise at the moment that people, because we had a landslide majority and superb victory, I do think that people think that the leadership can do no wrong. I think that would be a great miscalculation. The party activists are already very, very concerned about some of the directions we're taking. And Paddy Ashdown is not of our persuasion politically. He's anti-trade union. That whole group of Lib Dems do not believe in trade unions. We do. How on earth could... We could only... It would wreck the party. It would wreck the party.
I think the problem arises when you begin to agree with other people about the way society is organised. To put it in Marxist terms, terribly unfashionable. But when you begin to agree with the bourgeois parties about the nature of society, you're going to run a party that helps most of all the middle classes. And you just lose what we've had in this country for 100 years, a party of the poor.
We've got a mass of people here that have been totally let down, and by a new Labour government. You know, Tony Blair was going to be my hero, he really was. You know, I defended this man.
I think the pendulum will come back from New Labour back to grassroots Labour. And the demonstration that we've seen today, the reaction of the people that came to the Durham Miners' Gala today, the grassroots reaction, I think will eventually work its way back into the party, and we will reclaim the party.
David Guy is absolutely right. The pendulum will swing. And you can't wish away a tradition and a pride in that tradition. It's real. And that's what matters in life, the principles by which people are guided.
I'm not aware of any human society from the pharaohs, with their slaves building the pyramids, to today, in which there is a middle way where nice people share their power and their wealth. I mean, every society in human history has had the rich and powerful and those that have no wealth and no power, and it's each society's struggle between the two.
I think, in fact, what the Prime Minister believes in is unideological politics. Men and women of goodwill sitting down together and deciding every problem, solving every problem on its merits without any ideological principle. Now, I don't think that's possible. They think it is. But of course, what they believe to be non-ideology turns out to be an ideology in favour of the vocal, the self-confident, the prosperous, the influential.
Looking over the cathedral in Durham, you're reminded of the permanence of the values that have guided people in the trade union, labour and socialist movement. And that's what really matters. We build our own future. It isn't built for us by people at the top.